Welcome to the Book of Urm. Tales of Piecora, the Haunted Fortress. Chapter 17, Forfeiture. Forfeiture. Somewhere far below the decks of the Sovereignty, Ravsesa shivered uncontrollably in the solid darkness as she sat on the floor with her knees tucked up beneath her chin. Fear had overtaken her like a chrysalis of ice and madness, and only the sweet warmth of Orchid's ointment still flowing within her held her together. The sounds of her trembling breathing and the creaks and groans of the flying ship high over the mountains echoed in her ears. Finally the darkness dispersed at the end of the cramped corridor by Piecora's approaching lamplight. Piecora had told her to sit and not to move from that spot while she went to get the light. It felt like an eternity before Piecora returned to her. Piecora approached hunched over due to the corridor's low ceiling and tight space, knelt beside Ravsesa, placed the lamp between them, and held Ravsesa's face with her calloused hands, aiming her up and over toward Piecora's so they could make direct eye contact. Piecora was sweating and breathing heavily. Her face, decorated with Cillian ink designs and lit by the oil lamp on the floor, hovered in the darkness like a wild wraith's stern visage from a folk tale of horror. Her braids hung randomly down the sides of her face, and her antlers were black with blood that glinted wetly in the soft lamplight. "Ravses, I need to tell you a few things," Piecora began steadily in between deep breaths. Ravses nodded her head slightly within Piecora's grip, as her fear only intensified from the vagueness of Piecora's introduction and the look in her eye. Piecora bent forward, kissed Ravsesa's forehead, and let her go before continuing. "Steady now and listen. I need you to be calm," Piecora said. "We descended into the very bowels of this ship, looking for the assassin creature. Me, Claeus, Willy, Ogiom, and several others from Ogiom's crew. We found nothing except for more of that goo, that changeling stuff that you found on the railing. The lower we went, the more we found, but there was no sign of the creature." She leaned back and adjusted her black braids from her face as she went on. Briefly, she noticed the blood on her antlers when her fingers felt wetness there, but it didn't interrupt her. "We got to the ship's hold, just above the bilge at the very bottom of the ship, all the way in the back, and that's where we found someone," Piecora said slowly, touching her antlers again and wiping her bloody fingers on her tunic. "Ravses, we found the man that took us by surprise in the museum. Your man, the noble from Muth, the man who spoke to you and wanted to take you back with him. He had his guards with him back then at the museum, but we found him alone here on the ship." Ravsesi heard the words, but they made no sense to her. It took Piecora's cold, ruthlessly serious countenance to suddenly snap the meaning of what she'd just heard into focus, and a deep knot of cold fear congealed instantly within her that overwhelmed the terror she felt previously. This was not the fear of the unknown that so gripped her while sitting in the darkness within the corridor. This was much worse. It was the fear of the plausible, but unconscionable. With this new fear came a looming, palpable doubt that made her question everything, including whether Piecora was actually herself or the shape-shifting creature alone with her in the darkness. Her mouth went completely dry, and a cold film of sweat instantly formed all over her body. How could she defend herself? Absently, her hand slowly moved toward the little knife she carried on her belt. She felt as if she were in the very presence of death itself, and her mind raced to concoct some sort of way to buy her more time to somehow get away. "Dao, Glear," Ravsesa stammered, barely able to formulate the words. "You can't be real." "Ravsesa, I need you to be calm, as there is more to tell you," Piecora said, while leaning in again to comfort and kiss Ravsesa. But Ravses pulled back and drew the knife with efficient deftness that even surprised herself. In an instant, She pressed the knife's point against Piecora's soft skin beneath her chin. Her hand shook as she violently collided with herself about what she was doing, unable to come to any conclusion based on reason or logic. Nothing made sense to her. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her ears filled with the pulsing of her own blood. And nothing else. She saw Piecora's lips move, and the sorrow in her beloved's eyes, but still she couldn't remove the blade. A mere push, a slight thrust upward, even just a nudge of the knife, and Piecora's life would end, if she were wrong. But she couldn't move a single muscle, couldn't lower the knife, couldn't do anything except stare into Piecora's dark eyes, as she couldn't know for certain whether this was actually Piecora so intimately close with her, or a horror like the one that attacked them in Rultin's sagery. Without moving a muscle in her neck or face, Piecora gently embraced Ravziz's knife hand and held it steady and firmly. Then she guided it slowly upward, so the tip of the blade broke skin. "No, don't!" screamed Ravziz in sudden defiance. She struggled to remove the knife, but Piecora held it steady to her own neck, like it was gripped within a blacksmith's vice. Ravziz felt a warm trickle of blood seep down the blade and over both hers and Piecora's hands. Piecora let go of her hand without lowering the blade, willfully conceding the decision of Piecora's life or death to Ravziz. Instantly Ravziz removed the knife and flung it behind her. Staring at her own hand and forearm, she saw Piecora's blood slowly dripping down like hot wax from a candle. She heard Piecora lean back, sigh heavily and say, "I am now tested, my love. Is this enough to know I am not the killer?" Ravzez threw herself against Piecora, wrapping her arms tightly around the Xianjian's head and burrowing her face into Piecora's thick black braids. She bawled uncontrollably into Piecora's smooth neck and breathed in the smell of her hair, rejuvenating her back to fullness of clarity. Piecora returned her embrace and rocked her slowly, whispering in Ravziz's ear, "I would have let you do it, Greoya, if you could not be convinced, and it brought you peace. My life would be forfeit if you perceived me as such a threat. I would have ended happily, knowing we shared this little bit of life together." They held each other for a long while within the darkness of the cramped passageway near the bottom of the ship, and they kissed each other to further consummate both the validity of who they were and the devotion they shared for each other. Finally, while still holding each other close, Piecora looked into Ravziz's eyes and said, "There's more I need to tell you." Ravzizi settled her head beneath Piecora's bleeding chin and listened to her heartbeat as Piecora quietly told the rest of her tale. "We entered the hold, fanned out, and I recognized the man as the Muthan Lord from the museum. But I forgot his name. Didn't matter, though, as I was the only one who recognized the creature's appearance. It must have plucked it from your memories or my own, as Rultin explained to us how these creatures chose their disguises." Cleese rushed forward with his sword. The creature, in Doglia's form, fought back. It shouted that it needed to see you, that it would be taken willingly if it could speak to you. Its words were convincing, and I hesitated. Cleese, however, continued his attack relentlessly, ignoring the creature's pleas for parley. The fight between Cleese and this Kelganostan assassin was the most harrowing sword battles I have ever seen. Two swordmasters, two completely different techniques. We surrounded them and waited for a chance to help. Cleese pressed it furiously against the wall, attacking it again and again and again, and the assassin was deft at defending and positioning itself so none of us could attack it. Finally, the assassin became fatigued, and Cleese wounded it badly with a series of cuts across its midsection, shoulder, and its head above the eye with his sword. Out poured Doglia's blood against the wall. Real blood. It wasn't the assassin all along. It was truly Doglia, your Muthan Lord, a stowaway on this ship. Before Cleese could withdraw, Doglia in his rage ran him through with his own sword, killing the Sovereignty's man-at-arms right there on the spot. Poor Cleisthenes. May his soul find comfort, doubled over without a sound, and fell to his knees lifelessly. Slowly, Ravsese sat up and met Piecora's eyes with disbelief. Piecora continued, "The others wanted to slay Doglia out of revenge, not caring whether he was the creature or not, but I intervened. I had to fight them all off. I wounded several of them, all the while expecting the actual assassin to ambush us and kill us all." Ravsese then realised the blood on Piecora's antlers and hatchet was from the very companion she joined up with to hunt the creature. She didn't know what to do or say, so exhausted she was by the violent confluence of fear, doubt, betrayal, and confusion tearing through her mind at the moment. That thing is still loose," whispered Piecora, her mouth trembling. "It's somewhere on this ship. It could be anywhere, and we have no idea who or where it is. I've never been this scared in all my life." Somehow Piecora's admission of being afraid galvanized Ravsese's resolve, and rising up through the maelstrom of her conflicting anxieties came a molten mass of self-assurance. "Love, you must tell me the rest of the tale," she said calmly, as she rode the heated upswell above her fears, thinking with clarity once again. "What happened after the fight?" Piecora wiped her tearful eyes embarrassingly with her hand and said shakily, "With Clace gone, we lost our leader, so everyone looked to me. I explained who the Muthan noble was and convinced them to not kill him, but to apprehend him and put him in the ship's prison. After we secured Doglia there, I hastily closed his wounds so he'll live, and then we agreed that I should go up and find you and bring you down to speak with him, while the others should go back down into the hold to reclaim Cleisthenes' body and place it in the morgue. Then we're all to meet back in the jail room to figure out what to do next." Piecora sighed and looked away and said, "I assume nothing was discovered upstairs at the party." Ravsese shook her head slowly. "No, at least not before you came and got me. I've no idea what's happening up there right now." "Give me a moment," said Piecora, and then her eyes locked together, as if hidden gears suddenly engaged behind them. They stared forward at the opposite wall of the corridor, shifting ever so slightly this way and that, as if reading something from a far distance. "Nothing amiss happening up there. They're all dancing, in fact. It seems the booze is taking effect. Your son... Wait, where's Ortor? Spirits." Suddenly Piecora laughed, and it rang through the passageway like the coming of spring. "He's on the stage with the musicians, sitting on Shamku's leg with the Heliclesian's jaw harp in his mouth. He's playing it. Shamku taught him to play it. They're all on stage playing music, and the people are dancing, except for Sifa." Piecora sighed heavily, and her face took on a mournful expression as she continued watching the party through Hiero's eyes. She stands nervously to the side, ever watchful and diligent. Poor Sifa. She will be devastated. She and Cleese were together while they sailed, but always ended it when they returned to shore, as it was explained to me. Clace is married with 2 young children. Sifa wanted him to leave his family and go to Cienja with her, but he wouldn't. He was too committed to his family. Oh, what a mess we've made. Piecora suddenly kicked the opposite wall with her boot and snarled angrily, "This thing could be anywhere right now. Right now. It could be anywhere." She kicked the wall again even harder and shouted, "How could this have gone so wrong?" "Piecora, how could we have known?" cajoled Ravsese, nuzzling up close and kissing her cheek. Then she rose up and held Piecora's hand. "Quickly now, let's get out of this narrow place. Let's get to the prison so I can speak with Doglia. None of this makes any sense to me either." Quietly, they gathered themselves up and moved quickly down the narrow passageway. Ravsese carried the lamp behind Piecora, and Piecora held her hatchet in one hand and a long hunting knife in the other. Only the sounds of their breathing and scuffling footfalls came to Ravsese's ears amid the groaning and creaking of the sovereignty's massive infrastructure. They descended several narrow stairs as they delved deeper into the ship's lowest sections. Ravsese fought against the ever-present fear that something lurked behind her in the darkness. keeping pace with them and matching their footfalls. Occasionally, she would stop and yank Piecora's arm as she heard a sound beyond their own making, but each time they stopped, they heard nothing until they continued on. Each level they accessed brought warmer air that lay stagnant within the bowels of the ship, as well as more evidence of the strange creature's existence, the thick, semi-clear, oily, sticky slime that it was composed of. Somewhere within her terror, Ravsez wondered why the substance was lying about at all, and how it got there. Was it normal for these creatures to leak this stuff while in their natural forms? Was it wounded? Was it their excrement? Was it how they multiplied? Each hypothesis she could think of eased her mind less from the mysterious lurking danger threatening everyone on the ship. At any moment, she suddenly realized, the floor could suddenly drop out from under them as the creature decided to enact its killing spree above, sending the sovereignty straight down into the mountains with her and Piecora trapped in the ship's hull. Finally, they descended a narrow spiral staircase into a space that was more open than the corridors above. Ravsez's lamplight revealed puddles of the slime everywhere, staining the floorboards and the walls, as if slowly claiming the environment as its own. A deep humming permeated this area, barely perceptible beneath the ship's creaks and groans. Ravsez wondered if the sound might be the vibration of the hull or the wind outside, or if they had drawn near any machinery that contributed to the ship's flight. In any case, Ravsez knew for certain she was no longer in what she might consider the ship's publicly accessible space. Down here were crew members that worked, ate, and slept, people that nobody above would know about. In a poignantly curious way, this made her feel more familiar down here than up there, for this is where the help lived, and the help was her world. Despite all the multifaceted terrors that filled her mind in this moment, her immediate thought when setting foot down from the spiral staircase was to wonder where the laundry might be handled down here. "Come on, it's not much further. Stay close," Piecora whispered tensely. Ravsez briefly considered the possibility that anyone who appeared in front of Piecora without warning wouldn't survive the encounter, whether they be friend or foe. They plodded onward, unable to avoid the squishy puddles in the darkness, until they came to a heavy, reinforced door. Piecora lifted a ring of keys from her belt and unlocked the door, then hurriedly pushed Ravsez inside before entering herself and pulling the door shut behind her. Inside, a rectangular table and several chairs stood in the centre of the room. A couch abutted the right wall, and large iron cages lined the wall opposite from the door. Piecora grabbed the lamp from Ravsez and placed it onto the table. Then she went about lighting several more lamps hanging from the walls until the room was suitably lit. The room was very warm, and the air was stagnant. In the middle cage sat a man on the floor with his torso bare and poultices wrapped around his ribs and shoulder with torn linen fabric stained darkly with the man's own blood. Another medicinal treatment covered the side of his forehead just above his closed right eye, wrapped around his head at an angle. Ravsez heard Piecora lock the door behind them and lay the metal keys heavily onto the table, then position herself next to the door. Ravsez slowly moved across the room toward the middle cage. When she reached the cage, she gripped the bars and knelt down to the floor. "Doglia," she whispered. The man opened his one healthy eye, and recognizing Ravsez, he suddenly scrambled toward her, causing her to let go of the cage and recoil in fright and repulsion. Doglia reached his hand through the bars and cried desperately, "My love, my love!" Ravsez couldn't respond. She couldn't think of anything. Her mind was a blank void of thoughtless space for the moment. "Winds above! Oh, the rains that fall from the cloudless sky! You are a heavenly sight to me," he whimpered. His raspy voice cracked, as if he hadn't had any water in days. He was filthy, badly wounded, and his hair was a matted mess of blood, dirt, and slime. But despite all of this, Ravsez instantly recognized him as the true Dorglir. She needed no blood test to prove it. He leaned his head against the iron bars and wept openly, slowly sinking to the floor. "Dorglir," Ravsesi said softly, while slowly returning to the cage. She placed her hand on his fingers, still gripping the iron bars. Her heart wept for the man, despite being unable to articulate her feelings for him, even to herself. She knew she didn't love him, but she also knew she cared deeply for him. She knew he was a good man, despite all that they had gone through. Seeing him here now sent waves of despair through her, each one more visceral than the last, as she realized everything he had given up and everything that might come to pass, because he never returned home. "Dorglir, what have you done?" she whispered. He slowly raised his head to meet her eyes and said while trembling, "I denounce it all. I denounce it all." He then collapsed into painful weeping and coughing that racked his body and disturbed the wrappings covering his deep wounds, causing fresh blood to emerge from the poultices. Ravsez looked back at Piecora, who stood resolutely next to the door with her arms folded. Piecora gave no hint of what she might be thinking or feeling, but Ravsez knew that Piecora was giving her the time and space to deal with this on her own. Suddenly, she was reminded of when they first met, and how distant and foreign Piecora was to her at the time. It felt like that again, right now. Piecora had made herself a stranger to her, not even watching the drama unfold between Ravsez and Dorglir. Maybe it is to protect her own feelings, Ravsez thought to herself. I cannot blame her. Ravsez felt Dorglir's fingers clasp around her own, and she whipped her hand back as if bitten by a snake. "I choose this life," he gasped. It was clear that he was mentally and physically exhausted. Ravsez thought he might collapse at any moment. "Dorglir," she said, trying to finally articulate through her messy thoughts. I don't know what to say to you. Why have you done this? I cannot give you what you want. I cannot be what you want me to be. I cannot even offer you protection from the crew. You've thrown your whole life away for... Yes, I did," he said, suddenly smiling as if finding long sought-after inner peace. "I threw it all away. All of it." He let go of the bars and collected himself, sliding along the floor until he sat cross-legged against the side of the cage, looking at Ravsez through his dark, mangy hair with his one functioning eye. "Either way, my life is forfeit," he said. His voice was clearer now, deeper, as if he had passed through the tumults of total despair and found clarity on the other side. "I could not go back to my family after seeing you in Coast Haven," he continued. "I sent the rest of them away, but I stayed behind. I sent them home with this message to my father, that I'll never be seeing him again. Since he can no longer produce a new heir due to his illness, either the chancellery passes to an illegitimate bastard son, or is handed over to a different house unfamiliar with the responsibilities of the chancellery, shaking up the power structure and social order of Muthan nobility. In all cases, it is likely the downfall of House Veklischer. There will be no honour spared for my family in the eyes of the king and House Numan." From depths long hidden within Ravsez came an unexpected deluge of grief that overcame all of her fears of the current moment. She grasped the iron bars desperately with both hands and shook the cage, while tears suddenly poured from her eyes. "Dorglir, no!" she cried. "You cannot do this! My whole life means nothing if you do this. All of my memories, my childhood, all of my family, serving your house for generations. You cannot throw all of that away. The legacies of all that came before you, before us. I do not wish to bear that burden any more," he shouted angrily. "Not any more. No one should be given that burden." He waved his arm in front of him, while clinging to the side of the cage with his other hand. His voice sheared through the muted stillness of the room like a saw cutting through soft, decaying wood, and reverberated powerfully all around the jail room. He hopped to his feet with sudden exuberance and paced angrily. "I am free of it! I choose to be free of it!" He then spun around and glowered at Ravsez, spitting out the words while pointing behind him. "I did not choose that life, the life I was dropped into from my mother. I choose this life, with my family where I belong, at whatever the cost. I do not need your permission, nor my father's." He shouted at the room over Ravsez's head with the fullness of his commanding voice, drunk on anger and destitution, swinging his hand grandiosely as if addressing a large audience. "To the hells with legacy, and the bonds that shackle us. I want it no more." He knelt before Ravsez and wrapped his trembling fingers around hers. "Don't you see? I do this for me, not for you. I would have returned to Muth if I envisioned any future there in which I might find purpose, fulfillment, and healing of my heart. The chancellery, a new wife, a new family, generations of wealth and privilege perpetuated unto my progeny in the name of family honour, and my own name counted among them. Portraits of me hanging on the walls of the mansion alongside generations of my forebears. Could such a thing bring me joy? The same joy I felt when we created a family together without the consent of my father. "Or my own," Ravsez sharply rebuked him. "Do not sell yourself too hard on this fantasy of yours that we did anything together jointly. Did you not learn anything that I told you? I cannot put it any plainer for you. I never loved you, but I tolerated you, I entertained and placated you only because of your station and nothing more, and from that came Ortur. Oh, Doglir, I know you are a good man. I know you are not your father. There is goodness in your heart, and I know the risks you took to provide for me and Ortur. For that alone you have my endless gratitude. But if I feel anything for you now, it is immense pity. You should have stayed in Muth and accepted your place there, for there is no place for you here." There was a long pause before Doglir said quietly, "I followed you because I love you and I love our son. I am here not to be with you, but to be near you, to be adjacent to our family so I can serve and support in any way I can. I cannot do that from Muth since you left. As soon as I realized you were beyond my protection, I knew I had to try to find you, and it is why I can never return home." "Pride is what drives you," Ravsez spat hotly. "Pride is why you cannot return home, as that would admit defeat. Facing the wrath of your father would be easy compared to what you'd put yourself through if you just left us alone. Pride is why you followed me even into the wildlands, even while knowing I am unclaimable. You've created your own myth about me and Ortur that you cannot extinguish. You think we are your family, but we are not. Something is broken within you that makes you unable to see things as they are. It drove you to madness, and now here you are. How you survived this long down here is beyond me, especially given our current She was cut off by a loud, shrill scream from outside the room, followed by a loud, heavy crash, like several crates being dropped from a high elevation. In one fluid motion, Piecora grabbed the keys from the table and threw them at Ravsez just as she kicked the table over onto its side. Before it settled still, Piecora punted the table with her boot with a loud grunt that sent the table skidding across the floor and slamming against the door to the prison. "Open his cage!" she growled angrily without taking her eyes off the door. "Let the Muthan stowaway out!" Stowaway. Ravsez's mind somersaulted at the irony of Doglir, son of Dorian Veklishi, Chancellor to King Mendilshus Newman of Muth, and a man of untold generational wealth and power, had chosen to follow the same fate she and her son had chosen to escape him, his family, and Muth as stowaways. Her hands shook uncontrollably from fear and confusion as she finally managed to insert the key into the lock and twist it. With a loud metallic thunk, the door swung open on its creaking hinges. Doglir hopped to his feet and stepped toward the prison's exit, wearing nothing but his trousers, boots, and the medicinal wrappings roughly applied by Piecora earlier. Piecora flung Doglir's open-bladed longsword high across the room, and landed it at Dorglia's feet with a loud, piercing clang that shook Revizes's every nerve and caused ringing in her ears. A moment later, the sword's scabbard and belt landed on top of the sword. "Pick up the sword, noble," Piecora shouted savagely. "Defend yourself or die. Is that enough choice for you?" she growled. Dorglia quickly fastened the scabbard around his waist and lifted the sword from the floor. He stepped out from the prison and said to Ravses quietly, "Get the lamp and stay behind us." Then he stood next to Piecora, faced the barricaded door, and waited. Thank you for listening to this chapter from the Book of Urm. If you enjoyed this reading, like and subscribe to our channel, and consider supporting us at the Book of Urm at patreon.com.